One thing I wanted to be able to do more is reading. I'm one of those people who buys books and comics that I think could be interesting, but ends up not reading most of them for lack of time. Not only wasn't I able to do more than 4 videos with a script this year, which comes to about a video a month, already not up to date, I'm only being able to write this video because I had to kill some time between classes. And going to events is another thing I would like to be able to do more. In part for the cosplay, but also to be able to buy some indie comics and fanzines. If you, as most, can't buy a lot of comics, it's a way to get some stories for much less. It's worth it. And there's the cosplay too. Follow my socials. This is Entropy 15, 2015. The cover, it's quite basic. A drawing teacher told me once that using a white background was unusual enough to make a comic stand out, but as far as I saw, that was the case in all Entropy fanzines, so I don't know if it was for strategy or cutting cost. But it worked! The contrast puts the character into focus and it's an interesting design. It made me want to buy it. I can't honestly say there's a lot here, but it grabs your attention enough that I wanted the fanzine. We clearly have some shade and light work, an action character, and the rabbit head made me think it wouldn't be a character that takes itself too seriously. Looking at it now, that left arm doesn't fit his forearm, but that's nothing compared to the liphodic influences of the 2000s that still happen in Brazil. And I have also seen much worse and more expensive stuff, so we start the first story with some narration that's a bit more poetic to set the tone. Fortaleza, 1 a.m. The criminals don't sleep in the city of the sun and use the cover of night to engage in their illicit acts. But if you're thinking this is going to be full of purple prose, don't worry. Drug dealers, the rottenest race amongst human after politicians. They live of other strategy, like parasites.
I just find being forced to sit through drivel annoying.
Yeah, if it's not obvious yet, it'll soon be clear that the author's objective isn't poetry. And are the drug dealers the parasites or the politicians? Maybe both? But there's no clear indication of it, so there's no way to be sure. How about pedophilia? Where do the pedophiles go on that list? I imagine that politicians cause problems to more people, but each victim probably suffers relatively less, right? Or are you talking about just the politicians that get to the point of being worse than that? And if so, do the others not count? Ironically, the vote is in the government's side. I know, it's not something you should think about that much. It's just a loose thought that could suggest the character's mental state. The problem is that they seem to want the reader to relate to this idea, and that doesn't work. In the words of Lewis Black,
And they talk about it as if it's like a building that's walking around and doing shit. Government is human beings.
the Captain Avenger story is one big fight scene in which the hero pummels all the drug dealers until there's but one left. And the art has some issues. In general, almost everything works reasonably well. The exception is this panel, where I was sure that Captain Avenger had used jet bullets because of how much his leg disappears in the action lines. Other than that, I could say the poses are showy for no reason. Yes, being showy is the reason, but if you jump forward, you can't punch backward. And if you're punching someone in front of you, why would you make sure to tuck your stomach in? Is he so close to you that you don't want to look like Mr. Incredible? Is that Mr. Enter? Would Captain Avenger be one of his trolls that lives in Brazil? Maybe he's just literally a troll, with that shrinking thigh besides the cape disappearing. And when he's hit, Captain Avenger spits his gum? Is he Tango from Samurai Zombie Nation? Finally, the last of the drug dealers gives up, and Captain Avenger says he's gonna beat him up anyways. Yes, because he's a real hero, like Liefeld would make. For those who are not from Brazil or that don't remember, people started getting frustrated with their politicians' incompetence and because of that they started to wish them dead, while they elected one of the most incompetent in the history of the country. Look, that story of the Avengers avenging the Earth is just in the movie. The Avengers called themselves that because they thought the word sounded good. This kind of do what you think is right yourself and don't worry about the consequence attitude leads to stories like Holy Terror, which might serve for some catharsis but are full of prejudice and empty of solutions. After the senseless beating, we continue with Don't Ask, Shoot, which is Captain Avenger in space.
Really? He's dressed different, he has an alien name, and he doesn't start punching people? But it's basically the same story.
The slight difference between Bat Beat Up and Korak is that the first is Batman, so he investigates and fights better, while he is looking for someone and uses guns. He's even a bit more interesting when fighting because he's not a super fighter and has to use an explosive to be able to escape, but it is still a 2000 story just in space. Because if I change his name and I say he's in the cosmos, he automatically becomes another person.
I assume, as a crime fighter, that you too were inspired by one of these.
Cartoony but critical. We'll be right back.
And if you thought the problem was where it was placed in the comic,
Hitting Guts and Piss is a story in space that starts with a troglodyte wanting to fight and exploding an alien's head.
besides being next to this story is a much bigger problem than being next to the other one because, you see, this one is way better.
In itself, this isn't all that well done, especially because he introduces himself to the guy while doing that, so either this extraterrestrial has ears on the torso, maybe for yelling countless times, "Fairies!" or the author meant to give it an effect, which in 2 pages is going to be done differently, with him having status besides him, perhaps to show the fight is about to start, but without someone shouting, "In this corner, a gigantic guy. And in this corner, the character that was on the cover but more cartoony and pissing acid on a light post." They talk shit to each other until the bunny says he has to finish peeing, the other agrees and is melted by acid. Oh, and there's a guy called Booger that came to say he almost popped his cherry but farted and ended up coming.
I'm not saying bodily dysfunctions can't be funny. I'm saying you have to have a joke with it. Just pointing and laughing doesn't work well for anybody but Nelson.
Yeah?
And don't let my criticism fool you. This story is the best one in the fanzine. Instead of trying to sell the guy that fights dressed as Batman, or the guy who fights like Star-Lord, this character is as much bollocks as the world he is in. If you're going to try to be ballsy and be serious at the same time, you're going to end up with... I wouldn't say this is a classic, but you can see why Pissed Off Rabbits is in the cover. Yes, that's his name. It's fun if you're looking for a story with jokes between the morbid and the nonsense. I still think the sex joke is pointless, but what can you do? And before we finish, you might be wondering why. Why are you reviewing this, Benito?
First, thanks for the views, subscribe, hit the bell. But second, because I think this is a good example of what a fanzine might bring.
Of course, some things might be too niche, some stories won't be good, but I still like Pissed Off Rabbit's design, and the criticism are honest observations and mostly done to show what I think the problems are. Quality is not a simple yes or no. It's at the same time something in itself and contextual. Almost nothing here is really that bad. It's a fanzine. It's a space where the author can experiment and see what works and what doesn't. I would not be talking about Entropy if I weren't interested in it, and I could see this character having his own comic if he were more developed.
No, I'm not here to say this is worth nothing. I just want to make 3 points.
First, this fanzine would certainly find an audience, but this Entropy, this chaotic collection of tumultuous turbulence and triumphs, it follows the tropes of this kind of story in order, pretty direct and clear, no subverting anything.
In other words, it's not chaotic. It's just as predictable as the goody-goody heroes.
You're just changing the flavor palette to vary between bitter and acid instead of salty and sweet. The two can have that umami, that quality that makes stories good, it just depends on how you use what you have. Second, Even if it's short or it's not at a professional level in some aspects, it was fun, and it just cost me R$2 in 2015. I honestly think you can find good material without depending on the big publishers. If comics are expensive, the fanzines and indie comics are an option. I'd pay for a story that doesn't work for me and keeps someone working on something new 1,000 times before going back to buying stories that are months old so Panini can keep dominating the market.
Support independent creators. That's the message.
But unfortunately, the third comes from the last story, and it's a bad story at that. Powerbomb Red against Dr. Black Force. In Every Cliché Villain Talks Too Much, a parody of Superman or something similar, here's a villain's speech until he sees the plug on his suit and he runs away.
Wow. Why?
I'd say it's a little too long. It could have been 3 pages, maybe 2. The idea might seem okay, being a well-known joke. But the problem here is that this section is called The Americanized Brazilian Heroes. It's worth noticing the author says the script and the art were done under a different name because he had joined the fad of authors changing their names to sound more American. And I don't see a problem with criticism,
Obviously.
but Brazil still suffers plenty with this fake nationalism stuff.
This book is really Brazilian, you reader who dares to read stuff from abroad.
Everyone says Americans changed Brazilian culture when we were the ones who imported it and copied their stuff. Nobody remembers, but we did the same with the French before them. At the end of the comic, the author says they are a satire of his old characters, which were just blatant copies of American heroes.
And what would Captain Avenger be?
Even giving the benefit of the doubt that he didn't mean to, there's no way to not see a more general critique being made here, in my opinion. While this zine follows the wave created by Image in the 2000s, this story still suggests that heroes have to be really Brazilian.
It's really simple. Good things are good. Make an interesting story and nobody is going to care where the inspiration came from.
It doesn't matter if it's obvious like it usually is in anime and manga, or if you got the jack-o'-lantern spirit from Portugal's Halloween, if it was from RPG, from mythology, or from somewhere else, do your story well and people will recognize your effort. Not everyone, but some, and those will support you in whatever they can.
And if you enjoyed it, please like, share, sub to the channel, and hit that bell.
Just pointing and laughing? It doesn't work well.
Well, we're getting there. Just some adjustments to the containment.